women and children. Locally, our branch has donated over $100,000 to Norfolk General Hospital for research and medical equipment. Just recently, this past year, 2 battle chairs went to win awards there. This year, our Circle branch has concentrated its efforts on wheelchair accessibility for seniors and handicapped members of the community with the installation of electronic doors. And all across the nation, Legions are reaching out to homeless veterans and those with hidden injuries such as PTSD. With the help of our communities, we can serve them better. Each year, the leaders of our nation, our province, and in this case, local municipalities, are ceremoniously given the first copy of the campaign. Your Worship, I ask your permission to approach you to make this presentation.
I would be most delighted to meet with you, John, if you want to come forward. Just very briefly, Mr. Charlo, I want to thank you very much for being here today on behalf of Council. Good luck with your campaign again this year. Many volunteers, and with Branch 79, and as well, we wish the best to our other 5 legions as well around the county.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned last year, you get in trouble if you bring a gift for one and not for all, so I do have an item for each of the councilors, if I may, and then I'll be out of here.
Certainly may. Thank you again very much. Thank you. Ooh, very nice.
Once again, thank you for your time, and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Would ask at this time if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest to declare, council members. Hearing none, I'll move on. I am now moving forward to page 63 of our agenda, where we have 3 applications this evening and 1 staff report to deal with. I will now officially open the public meetings handled under the Planning Act and the Municipal Act. I advise those in attendance that the Ontario Municipal Board has the power under the Planning Act to dismiss an appeal to either a zoning, bylaw, and/or an official plan amendment if the appellant does not make oral submissions at the public meeting or does not make a written submission to Norfolk County Council excuse me, before the zoning bylaw is passed and/or the official plan amendment is adopted. Page 63 has our first staff report, DCS 17-78. 63. An application has been received to extend a temporary use bylaw on the subject lands to permit the continuation of a garden suite. Denise James, on behalf of Scott Gerald James, has put forth the application affecting the lands described as 492 Wyndham Road 14. I now open the public meeting on staff report 17-78. Ms. Alicia Call is with us this evening. Welcome. I will turn it over and you can give us your report, please.
This is an application to extend the use of a garden suite for an additional 3-year period on the subject lands. The garden suite was originally approved for 5 years in 2007 and extended for an additional 3-year period in 2014, expiring in December of this year. The subject lands are 5.5 acres in size and part of a 50-acre parcel that fronts onto the south side of Wyndham Road 14. The lands are zoned and designated agricultural. A garden suite currently exists on the property, and a legitimate and justified need continues to exist for the unit. The applicant is aware that the unit must be removed when no longer needed or when the need ceases to exist. Staff support this application and recommend that it be approved.
Thank you very much, Alicia. Any questions through to our planner from council members? Is Denise James or an agent in attendance here on her behalf? See no one. Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in support of this application? Is there anyone in attendance this evening who wishes to speak in opposition or in general to this application? Anything from council? I will need a mover and seconder to close this public meeting. Walls has moved, Columbus has seconded that we do close this public meeting. Those in favor? Public meeting is closed. There we go. Thank you. What's your wish? Councillor Oliver.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move the recommendation in the report.
Thank you, sir. I will need a seconder. Mr. Black. Councillor Oliver has moved. Councillor Black has seconded that the application by Denise James, 492 Wyndham Road 14. This affects the lands described as part of Lot 15, Concession 14, Geographic Township of Wyndham in Norfolk County. This is to amend our zoning bylaw 1Z 2014. File numbers before you, gentlemen. Recommended for approval for reasons set out in this report, 17-78. There has been no public input received for this application, and therefore it will not be considered as part of the decision. Any discussion? Those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alicia. I'm now going to page 73. The staff report is DCS 17-72. An application has been received to provide relief of the following deficiencies. Created through a farm split, first of all, 36.80 hectares from the minimum required lot area of 4 to 40 hectares to permit an area of 3.20 hectares. Secondly, 1.04 meters has been requested from a minimum front yard setback of 13 meters to permit a setback of 11.96 meters. And thirdly, .78 meters from the required exterior side yard setback of 13 meters to permit a setback of 11.22 meters. Nightingale Farms Limited and the agent is Civic Planning Solutions, Inc. They have put forth this application affecting the lands described as 1492 Wyndham Road 19 La Salette. I now officially open this public meeting on staff report DCS 17-72. I see Mr. Matt Vaughn is here, and I believe he is ready to present his report. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you. So Nightingale Farm specializes in growing fruit and vegetables both in greenhouses and as field crops. The operation farms approximately 1,500 acres in Norfolk County. The operation presently grows a variety of conventional produce such as asparagus, beans, cantaloupes, cucumbers, eggplants, Roma tomatoes, peppers, and organic produce. On August the 16th of this year, Norfolk County Committee of Adjustment approved a consent application which severed a parcel of land having an area of 3.2 hectares. As a condition of approval, the applicant was required to obtain zoning bylaw amendment for the deficient lot area, front yard, and exterior side yard setbacks. The purpose of the severance is to permit a greenhouse to operate as a single entity that can be separately owned, which will provide operational flexibility to the overall farming operation. A description of the financial viability of the proposed 3.2 hectares site can be seen in Appendix A of my report. Planning staff have received comments and met with some neighbors adjacent to the existing greenhouse operations. There has been some concerns raised regarding the growing of cannabis on site. Should the owner wish to pursue a medical marijuana production facility use, in the future they will be required to comply with the zoning bylaw, which includes site plan control. Furthermore, planning staff are of the understanding that a letter of support is required for a federally licensed medical marijuana facility. This approval would trigger the necessity to comply with the zoning bylaw and require the applicant to submit a site plan application for such a use. At this time, the applicant has stated that there is no indication that marijuana will be grown in the greenhouse. A licensed marijuana facility would require a zoning bylaw amendment before they could operate, plus a federal permit would be required, which they would not likely get. As part of the planning application, the applicant has signed to provide truthful information, and this is what planning staff have to review. Based on the policy review, it's the professional opinion of community planning staff that the subject application is consistent with the policies of the PPS, conforms to the intent of the OP and the agricultural designation. Staff support the application and recommend that it be approved.
Thank you very much, Matt. Questions to staff? Councillor Black.
Mayor Luke, thank you very much. Through you to Matt. And considering the fact that we're already councilors are getting calls about marijuana grow ops, and this is a facility that could potentially be growing marijuana for medical use. I'm wondering, is there anything in place in terms of minimum distance separations like we have for, hog operation, animal operations? Problems with that's happening right now is the smell. So do we have kind of a setback for that? Are there any homes in close proximity to this site?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Mayor, we do regulate marijuana production facilities, the medical versions of those, and there's a very specific license that relates to those. We do regulate them in our zoning bylaw, and we can also regulate them through site plan control. There are specific setback requirements in our zoning bylaw. For instance, in the agricultural area, it's 150 meters. So there is definitely buffer requirements, and there is a residence within that buffer zone. If the owners were to try to apply for that type of facility, it would not meet our existing policy under that type of license, I should say. There are other instances that staff are aware of that are occurring in Norfolk County that do not meet that particular license requirement, and that may be what you're alluding to.
That is what I'm alluding to, and the problem is the smell, and it could be, it seems that one license requires filtration and the other one doesn't. So why can't both of them? And, I think if it's been brought to our attention, I'd hate to be approving something that's going to create another problem, because this is a big problem. So you're feeling assured by putting it forward with a recommendation of approval then that that's not going to happen and it won't come back to bite us.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, what Councillor Black is referring to, I believe, is what's referred to as a designated person's production facility. And this is something that is a relatively new term in that particular industry. It is something that we have canvassed our rural partners with to see if they are experiencing a similar type of situation, and they're not. It seems it is a very unique situation in Norfolk County. In response to what's been happening, we are putting together a cannabis task force internally. It'll consist of planning, building, fire, the health unit. We're involved in the OPP, and we've also invited a representative of Health Canada to join to at least explain the policy and explain the licensing system to us. At this time, planning staff don't have a lot of direction with what to do with the designated persons facilities. We have consulted with county legal staff, and at this time, it would seem that we're just not 100% clear on how to approach it, which is what's sparking the creation of our cannabis task force.
You wouldn't recommend deferral on this pending further information from Health Canada on how to deal with some of the problems that they're creating right now with the smell?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, what we have in front of us today is referred to as a farm split. Based on what we have been told through the application process, this will not be a facility that grows marijuana, medical, or the other type of facility. We have been told by the applicant and agent that this facility will be used for the production of vegetables in the future, and that there may be a potential buyer that is a grower of vegetables. I would defer part of your question to the agent who is present, and they can explain maybe some of the back workings of what's going on in terms of who it's being sold to or what they're planning on using it for.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, with this farm split, will you be able to build a house on it?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there is already a house on the existing property that is being split, so there would be no...
Okay, so there's a house with the greenhouse operation?
That's correct.
I believe the house is behind,
It's behind?
back from the road behind the greenhouse.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Oliver, then Brunton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will ask Mr. Rowe a question or two when he gets up relative to potential intended uses. But I want to pursue with Matt a little further Councillor Black's question regarding a deferral. Council would have the legal authority, I presume, to defer this application for a period of time this evening, should we decide that's the best course? Is that correct?
Matt, would
Yeah,
we
through-
be able, council has the legal right to defer?
Oh, through you, Mr. Mayor, of course.
Thank you.
And for what period of time?
I believe it's up to 3 months.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brunton, please.
Thank you, Mayor Luke, through you to Matt. Matt, I'm just wondering, like, this marijuana issue is federally regulated, supposedly, but we have this other problem. And I'm wondering if and I'll use the example of the recent crematorium issue, where I think under the Cemeteries Act, it didn't matter what the zoning, they still had to come before this council to get approval for a crematorium, irregardless of zoning or anything. I think that was in the Cemeteries Act, if I'm not mistaken.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct, and it's a very similar situation with the medical marijuana production facilities. They would need a letter from the municipality giving them the okay that the zoning's in place and that there's no other regulations that they would need to meet in order to start it. But that's for that one type of licensing system.
I realize that, but could your task force, like supposedly this thing doesn't happen, or the legalized version of it doesn't happen till what, next summer or next year? Am I correct on that?
I'm going to ask the clerk if he can answer your questions.
Well, whatever.
Just a point of clarification on the crematorium issue in case we deal with another issue in the future. There are other mechanisms than council for getting approval. Other municipalities have used the issuance of a building permit for a crematorium in order to trigger the process, but there's always a requirement for us to post notice in the newspaper and get that. So the crematorium issue, just in case we deal with another one, it can have different things than coming directly before council.
But is it not, and I'm getting off topic a bit, but was it not in the Cemeteries Act or whatever that stipulated a different condition that they had to comply with locally? My point is this: if the federal government is still, I mean, I don't know what the rules are for impaired driving and marijuana, all those things, nobody seems to know. And I'm wondering if your task force could not look at that to determine some form of legislation that comes out, says, doesn't matter what marijuana type of grow up it's going to be, that it has to be approved by the local authority, being the council. Similar to what we did with the crematorium issue. It might be a wise way to approach it.
And through you, Mr. Mayor, that is on our agenda.
Okay, thank you.
I think the whole idea is here, stay tuned. It's
Okay.
forthcoming. Any other questions to staff on this report? Okay, we'll move ahead, and certainly council has a chance at the end to ask should further questions. Mr. Rowe, the agent, I see. David, if you could come to the podium, I'm going to ask as procedure if there's anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in support of the application. Of course, we always allow the applicant or the agent to go first, so that means you're up.
Yeah. And here, I guess, to answer questions that council might have, the application before you is to deal with the zoning provisions related to creating a smaller size agricultural parcel that has resulted from an approved severance from the Committee of Adjustment. So we're dealing with permitting a lot size that is less than the 20 hectares and certain setbacks. As far as the use of the property, it has been used for growing commercial vegetables. The owner is proposing to sever the greenhouse from the newer greenhouse from the existing greenhouses located to the north and other farmland. These have historically been used to grow vegetables. At this point, he is negotiating with a couple of potential purchasers, one a commercial vegetable grower to grow peppers and the other a commercial flower grower. As far as being able to grow marijuana within either of these greenhouses, the one in question, in order to meet the zoning for a licensed medical marijuana grow operation, my understanding is that he wouldn't meet the 150-meter setback. So prospective purchaser would have, I guess, two options: either to come and ask council for relief from that, or to possibly purchase the neighboring property and remove the house and thereby meet the bylaw requirement. As far as whether you can grow marijuana today, tomorrow, you can grow marijuana there now, whether it's one greenhouse or whether it's two. What we're simply doing is doing a severance, and to ask that this be deferred until the much bigger marijuana question really be a hardship to my client, because he's in the prospect of trying to refinance and to sell his property. And I know that when you start looking at the other means of growing marijuana that allow people to have personal licenses, and my understanding is people are permitted to grow it in their backyard, in their second bedroom, on their balcony in an apartment. there's in fact really no control except whatever the federal government wishes to do. Federal government has, at this point, not chosen to allow municipalities to have much of a say in that end. Certainly, my client is just simply trying to reorganize his finances. He wants to be able to have two separate entities, which assists certainly on the financing perspective. And, whether somebody in the future, purchaser, chooses to grow marijuana, well, they'll have to grow it within whatever laws are in existence at that time. I think trying to put a freeze on any type of operation where they could potentially grow marijuana, you've got to keep in mind that you can grow it anywhere, so I gather with that in mind, we shouldn't allow any new lots because somebody might want to grow some marijuana. So I think we have to focus back. This application is to simply implement the conditions of the severance and leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Black?
Luke, thank you, and through you to Mr. Rowe. Just wondering, in the back of that, behind the severed portion, the retained lands, what is that operation? Is that, are those greenhouses as well?
Yeah, there are greenhouses to the north that are part of the Nightingale fruit vegetable operation.
Have we ever had something like this happen before? Because I don't remember seeing something. It just seems odd to me. Would they be able to come back now and sever that piece off?
No, whenever you're doing a farm split, you have to show that each parcel is viable and meets the policies regarding doing a farm split severance.
Well, when I look at that, I think, well, that's one operation. I mean, you got greenhouses and greenhouses. Now they're splitting it in two. It seems odd to me, but I guess it's not. Have you seen anything like this occur?
Well, I know in another municipality, especially where you have big poultry operations, that you'll have poultry barns in different ownerships.
Okay, have you seen this in Norfolk before?
Not that I can recall, but it's certainly in the chicken business I've seen it.
Okay, so it's not chickens though, it's greenhouses.
It's greenhouses, but certainly once you get to a certain size, it's viable. And it meets the requirements for a farm split severance.
Thank you.
Councillor Columbus and then Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do not have a problem with indicating that 2.9 acres of greenhouse is certainly could be a viable operation. I guess planning staff have mentioned to us, Mr. Rowe, that the applicant and perhaps yourself have indicated that this greenhouse operation will be used for vegetable production.
That would be the purchasers looking at it. One is a flower producer, the other is a vegetable producer.
And not a cannabis operation.
They would have to, if it was going to be a licensed medical marijuana facility, they would have to get whatever approvals necessary to do that.
Okay, so you agree with the planner here that mentioned that it is for vegetable horticultural production?
Yeah, it would definitely be agricultural.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Oliver?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, David. I'm referring to page 86 of our agenda, which is the first page of your planning justification report. And obviously, the part that caught my attention in particular was the viability aspect economically. And this council has taken an initiative over our OP amendment process, as you're well aware, to acknowledge the fact that less than 40-hectare parcels of agricultural land can indeed be viable.
That's correct, yes.
Especially things like greenhouse operations. So I agree with you completely on that part. But the fact that your own report suggests a potential $4 to $5 million annual gross revenues from just the 2.8 acres that are currently under greenhouse glass or plastic, that's pretty significant. were those numbers based on an assumption that this could in fact be a licensed medical marijuana production facility? In other words, one of the big ones that is regulated by our bylaw, or was that potentially from the small personal use or designated person size of operation?
My understanding, and I had done work for one of our largest medical marijuana producers in Norfolk, that would be a large-scale commercial medical marijuana facility.
On that small a piece of land and that small a greenhouse could produce?
That was based on the figures that I was given, yes.
Okay. But again, you are trying to convince us that that is not the intended use, and I know you've acknowledged
Yeah.
that who knows what a future purchaser may choose to do, but I hope you can acknowledge or understand council's dilemma, because where we're having so many concerns expressed by so many property owners
Yeah.
regarding properties neighboring is over the small, currently unregulated personal use and designated persons operations. It's not the big ones. The big
Yeah.
ones would do all of the necessary air filtration.
Yeah.
So you have no idea at this point whether a future purchaser might contemplate a licensed large facility or a personal use designated person small operation.
Yeah, at this point, I simply don't know, and I don't know enough about small personal use operations to know how viable or that they might be.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Rowe? Not at the moment.
Okay, thank
David
you.
Moore may come up. Is there anyone else in attendance who wishes to speak in support of this application? Is there anyone in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition or in general to this application? If you would come, sir, to the microphone, push the talk button and give us your name, and we'll listen.
Mr. Mayor and honorable councilors, my name is Ed Dertinger, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my wife, Lynn Ann. Our property and our home for the past 17 years sits across the road from Nightingale Farms Limited. This application for zoning bylaw amendment to provide relief of the deficiencies created through the farm split, well, that creates some concerns for us, as our home is approximately 60 meters from the greenhouse, representing 2.85 acres of greenhouse of the 7.93 acres of the land that's up for the split. And our concern is based on the fact that the parcel of land being discussed has an MLS listing as such. There's the listing. Let me find where I am. Which clearly outlines a description of the greenhouse capacity, as quoted from the description, and I quote, built towards the future growing and expansion of medical marijuana once licensed through the government. Since the property is advertised as being built towards future growing of medical marijuana, it remains within the realm of possibility that the new owner could be licensed to be a designated grower of medical marijuana or a license through Health Canada for medical marijuana production facilities. Now, when recreational marijuana is legalized on July 1st, 2018, it's really not a stretch to say that this facility could possibly be used for that purpose. Our two top concerns for the potential cultivation of medical marijuana or recreational marijuana, being approximately 60 meters from our house, include our quality of life. And we talked about it here, is that pungent odor that's being inundated by you councilors. And it's going to be outside and inside our house 24/7, maybe for the rest of our life, if this goes through as a marijuana facility. And then there's an issue of light pollution, in that I can speak that when that greenhouse is on, I can go out at midnight and play a game of football on my front lawn. So there's a lot of light pollution also with the greenhouse. And then there's the whole issue of decreased value of our property. Like, who's going to want to buy a house if we want to sell due to the smell that's next to a marijuana operation, if that indeed is what it's used for? Now, the Planning Committee has included a comment in the report highlighting the existing Norfolk County zoning bylaw as it relates to medical marijuana, and one of the provisions of the bylaw states, and I quote, "No building or structure or portion thereof used for medical marijuana production facility purposes situated in an agricultural zone may be located closer to any dwelling, our place, public school, private school, place of worship, or day nursery than 150 meters." That's the magic number for us. We realize this bylaw protects us with reference to medical marijuana production facility as of right now. Our concern is when recreational marijuana is legalized on July 1st, these greenhouses could potentially be used to grow large-scale commercial recreational marijuana. Now the question is, does this same bylaw applying give us that 150-meter buffer? Right. We understand there is a proposal for a zoning bylaw in the works to deal with the pending legalization of recreational marijuana, as well as designated grower medical marijuana. And our understanding is that the draft is to be brought before council soon enough. We suggest that this zoning application be deferred pending the updated zoning bylaw being put in place. By doing so, we think our property value and the quality of our life would be protected by this bylaw. And the bottom line is, we don't want to spend the rest of our life smelling marijuana, right? And we're hoping that council will see fit to protect us from that. Thank you.
Any questions from members of council to Mr. Dertinger? Councillor Oliver, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ed, for your comments. We know the operation is currently growing vegetables in the greenhouses close to your property. So are you currently, I suppose seasonally at least, you have some, you are subject to light from the greenhouses, the idea of playing football in the front yard. That's a dramatic image for us, obviously. But that is only a seasonal thing? It doesn't happen year-round?
That is correct.
Yeah.
That is correct. Right.
Okay, so can you say roughly how many months out of the year do you feel that's a bit of an annoyance or an issue or a concern now for you? Or is it something you've been able and willing to live with?
I can live with that.
Okay.
Honestly, I can live with that. We sort of adapted to that,
Yes.
right? But at the same time, you know, if it's on all the time, right? Also, the idea being that if this is used for marijuana, the idea being that it's in a rotational basis, from what I understand, that they'll be coming into bloom or whatever throughout the year. There won't be a reprieve.
Right.
Like right now, you drive around the county, you can smell marijuana, right, from these designated growers or whatever. And I go and, you know, myself, but you know what, that goes on for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks of the year, and that's gone. But it'd be different if it's 24/7, 365 days a year, and it permeates right into your house, right? And I go, I just don't want to live like that.
Right, okay,
Right.
thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions to the speaker? Thank you, Mr. Dertinger.
Thank you, Mayor.
Is there anyone else in attendance who wishes to speak in opposition or general to this application? No one else? Anything further from council? Councillor Wells, please.
A question to our planner, if that would be all right, Mr. Mayor.
Absolutely.
Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vaughn, is it possible if we approve this and restricted the growing of marijuana, is that a possibility or not?
Through the mayor, the council has several options. and what they would prefer to do with this. They could make this a conditional approval, and if they did, they could make it conditional on site plan approval. They could put the property under site plan control so that if they were to build anything new or if there was any further development, it would trigger the site plan process. They could make it conditional upon putting site plan control on the property and making the owners go through a site plan and have them complete one. And there'd be pros and cons to that. There's the option of requiring the owner to enter in an undertaking to say that if they were to grow marijuana on the site, regardless of the type of license it is, that they would go through the site plan process. Council can do a couple things here in terms of how to regulate that particular use. Yeah, but yeah, it's our understanding, and this comes from our county solicitor, is that it wouldn't be advisable to strictly prohibit the growth of marijuana on the property because marijuana itself is not a use, it's a crop. Agriculture is a use. So in terms of Planning Act jargon, we can only do so much in terms of what we can prohibit and what we can't. It would be like saying you can have chickens but not cows. Through you, Mr. Mayor, just so there's to show you those options, I've created those options here on this slide.
Further, Councillor Wells?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Oliver?
Mr. Mayor, just on Matt's last point in response to Councillor Wells, when we put in section 3.2.1 of our new county zoning bylaw a couple of years ago, dealing with the large scale, the licensed medical marijuana production facilities, we imposed restrictions on where that use could be, vis-a-vis no less than 150 meters from the property boundary on which one of those sensitive uses took place. Could we not do the same thing relative to any legal marijuana production, regardless of size, scale, how it's licensed or registered with Health Canada? So again, we're not regulating the use. I understand the cows and corn comparison. We're simply saying under potentially another amendment to the bylaw where marijuana could legally be grown on any property. Is that also an option? In other words, perhaps a fourth option to the three that we have here today?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, without 100% certainty, I can just say I'm not really sure. That's one of the agenda items for our task force, is to determine whether or not that is an option for us, and if it is, it will likely be the direction staff would prefer this to go.
Councillor Black?
Okay, thank you, Mayor Luke, through you to staff. So you said that you are working on something, and is it a report that will be coming back to council in regards to the marijuana and the various types of licenses and the problems that it's creating? You're coming back with a report, and when?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, the task force is going to be initiating in early November. We are going to be looking at more than just this issue. We're also going to be looking at the retail sale as well. We'd like to try to get ahead of that curve. So between these two items, and there may be more, we'll see what comes up in discussion, but we will be bringing a report back to council. In terms of timing, I'm not 100% sure right now. I would say early in the new year to at least give council an update on where that committee is at.
Okay, so you're thinking the new year for this report. And secondly, site plan. What is site plan going to do for us if we were to implement that? Will it help us control the smell? Because that seems to be the big thing with the more personal licenses.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, site plan does a few things. We can regulate very simple things like parking and entrances and that sort of thing, but we can also regulate light pollution. We can regulate odor. We can require charcoal filtration. We can have odor studies done. We can have light pollution studies done. It's a very long list of items that we can regulate through our site plan control process.
Well, maybe that is the route to go then, because it seems that the problem we're having is smell. And without an avenue to do something about it, we're stuck. So I think maybe that might be the way to go, is to consider amending this recommendation to include site plan control.
Any other questions? Columbus first, then Councillor Geisens.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Back to the planners. In the meantime, though, there could be an application or a purchaser come forward that wants to legitimately use this property for vegetable production, right? And in order not to stop that, I wondered whether something like this could be added to the recommendation, and that Norfolk Council approval of this planning application prohibits the use of the 7.9 acre property for cannabis cultivation. You're telling us now that that's not a possibility, or like in the meantime, we're holding this applicant up from the potential sale to someone else for vegetable production also.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've been advised by a county solicitor that that would not be advisable, but council can do as they wish.
Thank you.
Councillor Geisens, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want you to take a look at what's on the screen here. If you look at those greenhouses, and we talk about filtration, well, the whole side comes up. So how are you going to be able to keep the charcoal or whatever you put it through? It's almost impossible. So I don't think that's going to work. And to me, I guess I'm not going to support the change, because we've had enough problems already with marijuana. We have some that are great, are being built for what they are now for growing marijuana. A lot of these greenhouses haven't been built for marijuana. Thank you.
Further questions? Councillor Broughton?
I'm somewhat confused here. If we turn this down, he could lease it out tomorrow. Under a lease arrangement, I'm sure he could. Doesn't have to sever it and have somebody own it. They could lease it, could they not? Is that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's probably correct.
Yeah. If you say that this gentleman said that he's within 60 meters of this greenhouse operation, if we put it under site plan and it's 150 meters is current,
Yes.
well then, what do we do if the medical marijuana want to establish in there? We just say sorry, it's too close, and stop it. Is that not how it would work?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, if they wanted to establish a medical marijuana production facility, it would have to come back to council, because right now it does not meet our zoning bylaw. So it would have to come back to council, and council could make that determination.
What about just growing, not medical marijuana? I can't believe there need to be that many prescriptions out there for this stuff. But is there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, right now we do not have provision in our zoning bylaw for anything except for medical marijuana production facility. So this use that has come up in Norfolk County, which is what we refer to as the designated person facility, that is not covered by our bylaw.
Well, maybe it's time to put this, defer it till such time as we amend our bylaw. That would be the way to handle it for me, but can we do that? And I don't care what kind of marijuana operation it is. If these people, I mean, he's got a good point. He's got 60 meters from here, and if it's marijuana, and I don't care how they grow it or what kind it is, he's going to suffer. So let's amend our bylaw and get that in there and defer this until that time. Can we do that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it will take planning staff a little while to do that. As Matt mentioned, there's no other municipalities that are going through the same challenges that Norfolk County is in this regard. The task force will not only be created to talk about the challenges with the recreation, I'm going to call it growing, but also the new legislation that's coming in 2018 that revolves around household growing and also retail. So there's a few components of this task force. The other piece that council should be aware of is that this is a severance application. So it was approved by Committee of Adjustment in August. And they have a year's time frame to meet their conditions, including the zoning condition that's before you tonight. So chances are that they will not be able to meet the conditions of their severance, perhaps by August next year if we defer this. Council should just be aware of that time frame.
Well, what would you suggest we do to avoid the problem?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we're providing the recommendation, but you have a decision to make tonight.
Jeez, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Height.
Thank you, Mayor Luke. Through you to Mr. Vaughn. Matt, is there anything stopping them from growing the marijuana on the 100 acres that's left from this split?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it depends on what type of facility we're referring to. If it was the designated persons facility, right now there are not many requirements for it, so they could grow it in any of the greenhouses they have there today.
I guess that's my concern. This is a severance application, isn't it? We're kind of off topic debating the crops that they can grow. Has planning ever told a Norfolk County farmer what crop they could grow specifically?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, and that's part of our hesitation and the sort of what we're a little worried about with the decision. So,
thank you.
So, Matt, if I may, for my clarification, a commercial marijuana operation needs to conform to our zoning bylaw and be in an agriculture zone or a industrial zone, and it must meet the setback requirements on site plus the separation of 150 meters, correct?
through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. The medical marijuana production facility, that is the requirements. And there are quite a few requirements for that type of facility.
And along that line, this severance that was granted in August by the Committee of Adjustment is 6 point something, almost 7 acres, I believe. Currently, the way it's set up with the neighboring residents, it could not fulfill and get a license for commercial, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, not for a medical marijuana production facility.
For medical marijuana. However, whether these greenhouses were part of a severance or not, a personal license to grow for personal use could take place on this property, whether it's, excuse me, whether the severance was granted or not. That's a fair statement as well, I think.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's our understanding that the designated person facility could, yes.
And I think that's the issue that we're having in this county. No control over who grows where, or in some cases maybe how much. Council?
Well, it is very confusing, and I've asked you this question, and because there's different licenses, let me ask it again. I said, would the solution be, for our situation, be site plan control? Would the site plan control address all the variations in Health Canada's licenses?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if council were to decide to put this property under site plan control, the trigger for site plan control would require development or change of use. That's the only way it could get triggered, unless council put it under site plan control and also required the approval of a site plan. So, yeah, it would help because we could make all of the other things happen, but the trick would be it would have to be placed under site plan control, and they would also have to complete a site plan. Like they would have to get the full-blown Section 41 agreement and everything. Our hesitation is, if this is not medical, or if this is not marijuana, we are imposing some very strict guidelines for some peppers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to planning. Are we not setting ourselves up here for legal problems? Here we have a legitimate application for someone to sever a parcel of land and grow vegetables. And we're about to say, no, you might grow marijuana, so we're going to turn you down. What are we setting ourselves in for here? As Mr. Rowe said, any zoning application or building permit could be turned down by saying, you might be growing marijuana there, so you can't do it.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, planning staff are recommending approval of this application as it is being put forward as a farm split, and these are the zoning before you is for setbacks and for area.
Councillor Columbus.
Mr. Mayor, everyone knows that we're struggling with this issue and issues with cannabis production across the county. We all get the communications, the phone calls, the emails, and people moving out of their houses because of it. Health Canada, they should be at that podium to answer some of these questions. I just wonder, are you having good communication with Health Canada, or are they not getting back to you? Are they answering all your questions? When are they going to come clean on setting the rules and letting us know exactly what we can expect and not expect?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we've contacted them on several occasions. Unfortunately, we are getting very generic responses back from them, which are not helping answer our questions.
Okay, Councillor Black.
Another stab at the site plan, Mr. Mayor, again to Matt. Could we make it so we're not impacting the vegetable growings, but could we say that further the application be placed under site plan control and site plan and require a site plan if the greenhouses will be used for marijuana production?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, council could use that as a condition if they wish.
So then, I mean, if they're growing vegetables, they don't have to conform to site plan. But if any type of marijuana growing occurs, whatever the license is from Health Canada, it triggers site plan control. That's sort of the intent. Would that work?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct, Councillor Black, although it should be noted that that would be challenging to enforce. It would be very much at the property owner's goodwill to provide us notice when or if a recreation marijuana facility was going to be produced, and that we could work with them at that time to go over the site plan requirements.
We do have a monitoring device there already, and I think his name is Mr. Dertinger.
Councillor Oliver.
Mr. Mayor, this is pretty important, so I think it is really important that we get it right. I think Councillor Black's train of thought maybe is a good one, because even if it is becomes a registered personal use / designated person operation, they are registered with Health Canada, and they are registered to grow a specified number of plants.
Correct.
And as we had discussion, I think, at our last meeting, or certainly at the last police board, on a complaint from anyone, from a neighbor, the Ontario Provincial Police are legally empowered to go to a location such as what we may be discussing today, confirm if they have a registration for personal use or designated person production, and to be told or to look up on a website of Health Canada how many plants can legally be produced on that site. And if more than that are being produced, then it becomes a law enforcement matter. So it seems, and if they don't have a registration, then it's obviously an illegal grow and would be a law enforcement issue provincially for the OPP. So barring having a bylaw amendment, which for me, Mr. Mayor, would be the preferred alternative, and I still may want to see that as our decision this evening, but I could see the site plan working provided it's for any type of legal marijuana production. The operative word being legal, because if it's illegal, it's an OPP law enforcement issue.
Brunton?
Last thing then, under site plan control, Matt, if I may, Mayor Luke, regardless of the type of growing operation, can we, under site plan, enforce filtration systems, whatever?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. We can